Hi, this is Kyle Bell, and I would like to be talking about my project. Um, this is about Herbalife as a legitimate multi-level marketing firm, or is it a pyramid scheme? And using these sources, we're going to conduct whether or not it is or not. Using the two sources, we have assessing MLM business, Herbalife as a legitimate MLM, published in 2012, versus Marketing Fraud and Approach for Differentiating Multi-Level Marketing from Pyramid Schemes in 2002. The topic of source one is an article about the criteria of a multi-level marketing strategy according to federal law, but it's also trying to connect itself to Herbalife and to determine whether or not it is a legit MLM. In source two, it's more broad. It wants to talk about multi-level marketing during the 1990s. Due to the internet explosion, an increase on illegal pyramid schemes came to rise, and it wants to focus on a mathematical model to conduct studies on whether or not certain companies are pyramid schemes or not. So I quoted these two based upon their arguments, and so source one, as referred to in the topic and focus, consists of it's trying to connect Herbalife to a legitimate MLM. So it's trying to break down Herbalife's marketing strategy and compare it to a legal multi-level marketing agency. And this article does that extremely well. On the other hand, source two goes into quantifying what is a multi-level marketing firm versus a pyramid scheme. And I quoted a company called Jewelway, where it had 10% of its distributed earnings and 90% of the rewards were paid through reps. And that was indeed pyramid scheme based upon the high amount of reps and the low amount of retail services. Now getting down to a quote for each. On source one, Herbalife, like other firms, does not have an end-user product quantify specific database that would not permit precise measurement of the proportion of sales made by non-distributor end users. But overall, it estimates that 34 to 41% of sales are driven through retail, which is much, much more than the company up here. That was indeed a pyramid scheme that had a 90 to 1 versus a potentially a 40 to 60. And so that is one of the key factors of proving that Herbalife is indeed an MLM. This quote is trying to quantify what an MLM ratio is for retail versus representative sales. And then it also goes on to talk about what a pyramid scheme would look like as far as low percentage of retail versus a high percentage of reps in that quote. A summary. So for source one, Herbalife Corporation International Nutrition Supplements Company has had plenty of accusations of being an alleged pyramid scheme. These allegations have been up in the air, but in this article, the author provided a clear and decisive article addressing these allegations compared to the hallmarks of a legitimate multi-level marketing company versus Herbalife's current multi-level marketing plan. Overall, Herbalife met all the requirements of being a legit MLM corporation, with the following criteria being met: compensation based on retail sales, not just mere recruitment, as I discussed earlier, a return policy, discouragement to distributors that hold large inventory so they don't get screwed over with their savings. Non-distributors consumption has a significant test, the MLM, as well as low enrollment fees with gross signals sellable products. So it's indeed a sellable product, and indeed it is an MLM. In this, it goes to show in the article, goes into a deep dive of quantifying what makes a company a legit MLM versus a pyramid model by giving various equations through with an explanation of both equations with real life examples from both MLM and pyramid companies. This gives the understanding that the flow of a company's multi-level marketing model and able to spot pyramid models when the equation by using the Koskut test, which was one of the equations it referred to in the article. Mentioned only a few lines of Herbalife in the article, claiming that the company wanted to be was out to be an MLM, and indeed this source said it was, because along with other ones in the 90s that got boosted sales during the internet era. These are paraphrases. So in source 1, MLM firms such as Herbalife aren't able to quantify the consumption of the end user products, but the company estimates that the 34 to 41% of sales are driven through retail, nutrition clubs, or challenges. And so that's kind of what I paraphrased here. In source 2, I paraphrased in 1990, the internet becoming of use for many businesses, pyramid schemes came to rise during this time and have similar principles to MLM firms, but the overwhelming majority of participants were rewarded with financial losses. The Better Business Bureau claimed that at the time that they're all over the country targeting many minority groups for extracting money, which is completely unethical. For example, in 1997, a large percentage of Albanians lost their life savings to Ponzi schemes. In China, the government put a halt to all operating direct selling firms due to the lack of sources to stop active pyramid schemes. Evidence. This was mainly verbal evidence, as well as one chart that compared Herbalife's marketing plans versus a multi-level marketing plan, and what the criteria was between the two. For the source 2, it had peer-reviewed secondary sources and primary sources. The primary sources were obviously the equations, and they cited some other secondary sources, but there was a lot of tables, figures representing data as long as equations, and explaining that throughout the article. So in my research paper, I can use source 1 as explaining it as more broadly and easier to explain earlier on to get for the reader to get an understanding of what is a multi-level marketing agency versus an Herbalife, how those two connect. In source 2, later on in the article, I'd be able to go more in depth and use these equations so the reader won't get overwhelmed, and hopefully coming out of it, they'll be able to understand what those mean. So how do these sources agree to disagree? Well, in source 1, it's much simplified and uses information subtly not to overwhelm the reader, and compares MLM to Herbalife, whereas source 2 did not. It just wanted to quantify what makes a legitimate MLM versus a Ponzi scheme or pyramid scheme using equations and focus more on quantitative data. But both uses figures to show the reader data, explains what makes a legitimate MLM. So how do these two contradict each other in a way? While source 1 is applying the fundamentals of MLM to a certain firm, Herbalife, it undercuts the exact measurements of what it is and bounds to be a legit MLM. Whereas in source 2, it goes into in-depth about what is an acceptable MLM versus a pyramid scheme, but is a far more broader subject with no focus on a particular firm rather than just a large time frame. Both sources, while may contradict, are both valuable together to intertwine into each other's research paper, into my research paper of my own. Thank you.